Once, I made a road trip through a continent that no longer exists. It's called Latin America. If you go there now, you will visit a very different place from the one I crisscrossed 20 years ago. The trip started far north from Latin America in Montreal, Canada, and finished 18 months later in Ushuaia, Argentina, in the southern tip of Tierra del Fuego. To compact a long journey in a very short description, we were 4 guys, 2 jeeps, and 1 continent. The crew for the journey sounds like the casting for an old joke. 1 Australian, 1 Canadian, 1 Japanese, and 1 Mexican. On the context of the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, we organized a research trip on environment and development in 6 different Latin American countries. The research gave us a very good opportunity to drive through the landmass that was named after Amerigo Vespucci. 5 centuries ago, when Vespucci and before him Christopher Columbus reached the land, the territory was uncharted by lack of geographical information. Today, Latin America is uncharted by cliches and prejudices. Let me share with you what Latin America taught me about the need to reset constantly our views of the world. Latin America sends a very strong message to the human condition. The past is not a fixed blueprint in the construction of the things to come. The future is not a mechanical repetition of the present. Let me put, for example, my own country, Mexico, which was governed for 70 years by the same political party. There were regular elections, but you didn't need a crystal ball or a statistical model to know the outcome, because the ruling party always won. There were some political opposition, but they were kind of uninvited guests to the democratic facade. However, gradually, in very slow motion, things started to change. A process of institutional construction built an organization which guaranteed free and fair elections. In small towns, the opposition started to gain the first positions in government, then in larger cities and at state level. In 1997, for the first time in almost 70 years, sadly my father didn't live to see it, the majority in Congress was lost by the ruling party. And in 2000, a different party won a presidential election. It was such an unhurried transition to democracy that political scientists could not agree when it started and when it was over. There was no need to redraft the Mexican constitutions. No walls fell down. No dictators left the country in the middle of the night. It was political change without a photo opportunity. Just ordinary citizens embracing the power of the vote and political leaders acknowledging the will for change. We have learned recently, the Mexicans, that democracy is not a magic wand to solve all evils, social evils. But at least the citizen will has added a healthy degree of uncertainty to electoral outcomes. When my 3 buddies and I were riding south and we reached Brazil, we arrived to a country in the middle of an economic meltdown. It was the summer of 1993, and inflation was 400% a month, the inflation rate. Prices could go up by 10% in a single day. Let me tell you how that looked like. If you went shopping into a supermarket, there was a huge blackboard above the entrance of the store, facing the cashiers and the aisles. And 3 guys in stepladders were rewriting and erasing the prices of the merchandise. While you were in line to pay, you could see the perverse effect of inflation working at fast speed as the prices of the goods you were expecting to buy were changing since the moment you went into the store. If you visit Brazil now, you will see that the nightmare of hyperinflation stayed back in the 20th century. The expected yearly inflation for 2013, for the whole year, it's equivalent to the expected inflation between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. in any given day of 1994. The consequence of this economic stability is that Brazil has managed to pull out of poverty 28 million people in the last decade. Obviously, Brazil has a lot of economic problems, but at least their challenges are evolving. The human nature and the mood of a country have something in common. A contagious sense of frustration happens when the challenge of an individual or a community remains the same from one generation to the next. If years go by and you're still tackling the same problem, you either are in deep trouble or you are a PhD student. Sad to say, I'm talking from experience because it took me 7 years to finish mine. But let's go back to my trip to South America. When we were designing the route south, we strategically avoided Colombia, which was in the middle of a civil war with several fronts, private armies from the right, guerrillas from the left, and drug traffickers from all over the political spectrum. At that time, the word Columbianization meant a spiral of increased violence and the bankruptcy of civic institutions. Today, Columbianization is a synonym for hope. At the peak of the violence in the 1990s, there were 80 murders per 100,000 inhabitants in Colombia every year. That rate has been diminished by 60%. Colombia still faces the demons of violence. But if you go there, as a very clever marketing slogan says, the biggest risk is wanting to stay. Now Colombia, it's a hub for policy innovation. Antanas Mockus, by the way, in the last 27 years, Bogota has never been safer. Now, from 2012 to these months of 2013, the Colombian capital has been even safer than Chicago. As I was saying before, Colombia, it's a hub for policy innovation. Antanas Mockus, a former mayor of Bogota, could brag that he's one of the few politicians ever to get elected to office, promising to raise taxes to everybody. In Spanish, the word tax is impuesto, which has the literal translation to English of an imposition. Very adequate, I would say. Antanas Mockus innovated language and policy in a very radical way. He proposed a voluntary tax which has the contradictory translation of a voluntary imposition. He invited the citizens of Bogota to pay an extra 10% from its legal tax obligations to support a different menu of urban policies. 60,000 people agreed to pay this voluntary tax. If I ever drive again through South America, I would love to go through the paved roads that were financed through these acts of voluntary taxation. Latin America is creating its own role models for economic success. Chile, it's on a fast way of becoming the first developed country in the continent. Panama and Peru are two of the fastest growing economies in the world. The continent has changed a lot. However, some places remain painfully similar to their own past. Cuba is an island in time and space, a society trapped in one of the worst ideas of the 20th century. A fierce economic embargo, supported by 10 US presidents, from John F. Kennedy to Barack Obama, has helped to preserve this isolation. Free trade is an untested antidote against tropical communism. In Venezuela and in Bolivia, elected dictatorships have a facade for institutional checks and balances and very thin tolerance for dissent. The curse of this society is that their problems look so similar from one century to the next. Their politics look like a postcard from the Cold War. And are testimony of what President Juan Manuel Santos of Colombia recently said. Societies that experience extreme political polarization inevitably suffer economic stagnation. Without the politics of moderation, neither Brazil, nor Colombia, nor Mexico would have managed to overcome the trend of their own past. Through a revolution of pragmatism and common sense, Latin America is changing its own destiny. Muchas gracias.